Yeah, so this is going to be a talking head about the writer's strike, and it's not going to be anything you've seen about any of the other writer's strike material. I think, especially YouTube, especially YouTubers who actually don't work in the entertainment industry, traditional, have done a great job, well researched, explaining the writer's strike. So if you haven't seen that, I encourage you to go see it. I'll try to remember to put some links below. But if you have, then we're up to speed. It doesn't matter either way. You don't need to know this stuff for what I'm going to talk about, other than to say, if you're anti-union, I am concerned you haven't looked into what unions are. And I honestly, I was sort of blind spotted by the idea that the internet has this opinion that these entitled, wealthy, out of touch Hollywood people are striking, and how dare they, because they're already making more than everybody else. It's true in that the people you see on the news, the famous people, the people you would see that you recognize, that you know their name of just by looking at their face, yes, they're the 1% of the 0.1%. And so those actually are people that you're referring to. But there's an entire gigantic, tens of thousands of group of people under them that are really suffering. And so I would argue these fancy people are just trying to, use their platform to explain what regular writers who are not famous, which is almost all of them, can't, because they're not famous. I don't think I explained that well, but my point is, most WGA people, first of all, the majority of them that are in the union are not actively working even prior to the strike. That's just a weird thing. The majority of them don't work, but a lot of them that do make so much more money than everybody else that it's crazy, and you know their names. The other thing is, it's a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. A writer is an introverted, quiet person who will raise their hand before just speaking freely, that kind of thing. It's a cliche for a reason. Not all writers are like this, certainly. And if you've broken into the industry and you work in writers' rooms, you may actually have to be a little bit more extroverted than that cliche. But for television, it's a writer's medium. Writers run it. Writers write the shows, and then usually higher level writers end up running the shows. That's what a showrunner is, even though that's not an actual job title. It's just sort of like an industry term. Yeah, so it's a writers driven show, or writers driven, business, whereas like feature films, it's a director's medium. So yeah, and that's the real difference. Like feature film, a studio commissions a writer to write a script, or a writer sells a script to a studio, and then if the lottery gets hit enough times in a row, that gets made into a movie. The director gets a director credit, the writer gets a writer credit, or writers. Yeah. In TV, it's different because TV is collaborative. There's usually a writer's room. There's really specific exceptions, like Mike White did The White Lotus himself, just on his own. He wrote the whole thing, which is a crazy amount of work that I don't understand how he was able to do. Correct me if I'm wrong. He might have had a staff, but I don't think he did. But most of the time, it's a writer's staff. It's a writer's room of writers of different levels. And so, and they get together and they knock out a show. And 15 years ago, when every show had 22 or 24 episodes, basically you have 10, 15, 20. If it's a really intense comedy room, it might be 30 staffed writers in this room or in two rooms writing a show. And so you collaboratively outline or break an episode, through the guidance of the showrunner or the executive producers, and then that episode gets assigned to a writer or writers to write, and they have to go off on their own time and write it. And then you continue breaking a show as a group. And once the episode is ready from those people that broke off, they bring it back. The room polishes it and fix it. Executive writers or the showrunner will probably do another pass to make the show is completely in the tone and in the sort of the voice of the show. And then that script gets sent out to be made in production, where the showrunner and executive producers, which are high-ranking writers, go off to the show, go off to production to basically babysit the show and babysit the script, babysit the words, because I'm certainly of the opinion, I've never seen any evidence to the contrary, the writing is the most important part of any scripted show. It just is. And so there's sort of a requirement to at least have somebody on set that came from the writer's room to advocate and to answer questions, but also just to protect like the story beats and the dialogue. I'm not saying they need to, in all circumstances, force the actors or actresses to say the words exactly as they're written. Depends on the kind of show. But the idea is, if an actor improvises something that changes the course of the plot, that's going to be incompatible later. And so the only person that has that sort of 10,000 foot view is usually the writer that was sent from the writer's room to set to be assigned to this episode to sort of protect the episode. That's how it used to be. There's more shows now, but also there's less episodes per season. And there's knock-on effects. Again, this is connected to the WGA strike, but it's more of like a consequence of how things are changing. And it's making things worse, and then they're also having a strike because they're not getting paid enough, which is definitely true, and that's connected, and I'll address that. So we have more shows now, more than ever, arguably. But they're like 8 or 10 episode seasons, and so they're a third long as they used to be. Which means all of a sudden now, it doesn't make sense to have 20 or 15 writers in a room if you're only going to do 8 episodes or 10 episodes. At best, you want 10 writers. You want probably less writers than you do episodes because there's a reasonable expectation that the showrunner will write a couple episodes themselves and then assign the rest of the episodes to the rest of the staff, because that's really how you get your credentials. That's how you get promoted. That's how you get everything, is you have to have writing credit. It's great to be in the room and it's great to sort of work your way up the room, but really the way to work your way up the room is to be in the room for the story stuff, but you also need to be given a chance or something assigned to the script so that you can prove yourself once you're in the room. And so you have to hit the lottery by getting into the room to begin with, which somehow will, given points and stuff I don't really fully understand anymore because I've been too far away from it for too long. You have to get this many points on this many credits in order to get into the WGA. That's the whole thing. Anyway, so it's you win the lottery by getting in the room. You win the lottery again by getting enough work that you've been added to the WGA. You win the lottery again as you continue to get script assignments and get into rooms and that kind of thing. And so a healthy room 15 years ago has baby writers, this is their first show or their second show, mid-level writers, so it's like staff writer, story editor, and then you have all these executive producers, co-EP, co-producer, executive producer, supervising producer, blah, blah. I said those out of order, but basically the executive producer is usually the showrunner. So that's usually the creator or the boss of the show, who's usually a writer themselves, but not always. But then there's always these different writers that have different statuses. And it's, so the lowly baby writer, a healthy show has a smattering of all of them, because those higher level people will get promoted and leave either during the show's season or, between seasons. When the season ends, everybody gets promoted usually, so everybody gets up. And so a couple of the big wigs that are not the showrunner will probably leave to go make their own shows. And then we'll add a couple baby writers because everybody got promoted. And so there's this churn. There's this, mentorship in the writer's room of baby writers getting experience and getting mentors out of these more experienced writers. And as the more experienced writers get assigned to go on to set more, they're getting sort of set experience and, apprenticeships and mentorships on set, usually by the showrunner or other high level writers and producers, to learn how to behave and work on set as the boss, as the person protecting the material on set. It's a different skill set, and you can go to film school and you can do all this other stuff, but it's one of those, you have to do it in order to learn it. It's an apprenticeship. It's by definition an apprenticeship. When you have these short rooms, these 8 to 10 episode rooms, all of a sudden it's only senior level writers in the rooms. There's no babies. And as a second consequence, usually these shorter rooms, 10 episodes, they'll write like a scripted or a streaming show will write all 10 episodes long before they ever go into production, which has its positives. If you're given ample time to write a 10 episode show, you can work out all the kinks way before the show goes into production. Because it used to be with like a 24 episode show, the show catches you by like Christmas and you're panicking from there on out. You build up, from like June or July to September when the show starts airing, you build up as many scripts as you can to stay ahead of the show, but eventually the show will catch you and then you just have to scramble. If you're able to write the entire season of the show ahead of time, you can work out all these other mistakes. However, then the show goes into production however many months later. Well, now the studios don't want to have to try to justify, taking writers to set, because the writers in their eyes have done their work. They've written the show. It doesn't make sense to have to bring them in to pay them to be on set. They basically babysit dialogue at that point. Except they should. So writers are not getting on set because the rooms are smaller, which means writers don't have set experience. So unless they're writer directors who have directing careers or they work in commercial directing or something, they're not going to have set experience, even though, especially in television, the higher level writers, you have to be able to run the whole set. You have to be able to run the show. So if you don't have set experience, you're either never going to get invited to set, so you're never going to be able to get promoted into a high level as a writer, or more importantly, you will get assigned to set having no set experience, and you'll fall on your face and you'll be a cautionary tale, and everybody will say, this is why we don't bring writers to set. They ruin set. It's horrible. There's a second problem to that. Because these writing staffs are smaller, no baby writers come in. So there's no mentorship there either. So basically just the same, however, 1,000 or so, 800 writers basically write all the same shows, because instead of having a 24 episode show, so your one show is your show every year. So you scramble and you melt your brain for 9 months, and then you have 2.5 months off to recover and sleep and, pee blood. And then you're back in the writer's room. Well, now, since you're only doing the 10 episode show for 3 months or 4 months out of the year, you have to pick up multiple shows. And so there's this dearth of high level writers that are working multiple shows, multiple years. And so there's basically very little opportunity for young baby writers to come in and work on a show. Maybe there will be one baby writer, maybe there will be zero. And the chances of them getting invited back is also a problem, because again, you have all these high level writers now competing for, the same jobs as baby writers. Whereas it used to be a situation where there were enough writers in the staff room, you could get a bunch of high level writers, you could get a bunch of mid-level writers, and you could get a handful of baby writers. But yeah, so all of a sudden, just based on just bad circumstances that should have been corrected 12 years ago, high level writers are more or less competing with baby writers for the same rooms. So it sucks. It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. I've without getting too specific, I've spent enough time in the industry to have peers and friends and classmates go into rooms as babies. And sometimes they get into the rooms and sometimes they don't. And it is what it is. But so much of being in the writer's room, it's like the word, it's like supercharged office politics. So, if you don't already know how to behave, for instance, if you don't know how to be the most likable, most approachable, most relaxed person in the world before you go into the room, you spend a few weeks in the room where you're doing 12-hour days, and you get sick of people real fast when you do 12-hour days back to back to back to back. If you don't have an absolutely sparkling, flawless personality that matches with everybody else in the room, they're going to kick you out. And if you think you're just not vibing with everybody in that room, but everybody seems to be having a good time and you can't figure out what's going on, you may be the problem. It's the whole, if you can't find the victim at the poker table, whatever, the pigeon or whatever at the poker table, it's you, the mark. If you can't find the mark at the poker table, it might be you. So it's a few things. And so the writers strike itself is not specifically addressing this, but this is sort of a knock-on problem. That is that, because these streaming services are, doing very fancy Hollywood math, which has been a thing for the whole time. Movies have been absolutely gutted as a result of Hollywood math. But because of Hollywood math, you used to be able to work on a show and it would go into syndication years later on different networks, and you would continue to be making paychecks every time it aired. But because streaming is sort of a moving target, and the only people that know how much and where your show or your episode is airing is the streamers themselves, and because they're either publicly traded companies or private companies, and they don't currently have to follow the same rules as like network TV, where they have to report ratings and report viewership and stuff, you can't even make a case for yourself that you should be getting royalties because your show is on Netflix and it does this many views a year or whatever, because Netflix doesn't have to tell you if it's doing any views at all. And they basically don't. I mean, we know Netflix, for instance, rewards monster shows like Wednesday, humongous hit. But I honestly don't think anybody working on Wednesday was told by somebody at Netflix, here's the numbers, here's how you did, keep up the good work. I just don't think it's a thing anymore. And so these writers basically are striking indirectly for transparency. They want to be able to have established rules on how to be treated, because right now it's a black box. The streamers have all the power and the writers have none of the power, and it just happens that the streamers are the servers where their data is being held, where the writers' finished product, which traditionally would have been continued to be redistributed, and you get to, yeah. And all this to say, your average working writer in Hollywood makes more than, an entry-level job or a blue-collar job. That is undeniable. But the things that had to have happened for you just to get to an average level writer in Hollywood, you have to win the lottery like 10 times in a row. There's basically very few terrible writers because it's too much of a life investment. You basically don't have a life in order to get to this position in Hollywood. And, things are changing. Again, I talked a little bit about 12-hour days and how maybe for the first time, thank you truckers for at least starting the trend of bucking the 12-hour day, because the body can't take it. We're sort of on set backing off the 12-hour day thing, even though it's still very much the norm. Yeah, it's still a cliche that the married person in a writer's room gets looked down on because if they get pregnant, if they have a kid, they're not carrying their weight, which is being finally undermined finally. But that's how ruthless this whole thing is, because there's crazy money, crazy pressure, and again, the money is not necessarily going to the writers. It's going to everybody else. The writers are striking. It's the writers. The WGA is like the worst team in the NFL, trying to confront not even like the best team of the NFL that season. They're trying to confront like the governing body of the NFL. That's really who that, like, where it's the scale between writers in the WGA with money and power versus who they're actually like trying to address. Yeah, you're not addressing other teams. You're addressing like owners of the franchise, owners of NFL programming as an idea. Like that's how big the difference is. And so to be mad at the writers for this is kind of scary, because you need writers. If you're doing something scripted, you need writers, and you can tell when the writers are not writing because it's terrible or it doesn't exist. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I really did a great job explaining this, but my point is, yes, the writers are striking for great reasons, and I expect them to be striking for a very long time because I think they learned a lesson from a couple years ago where the union for basically below the line workers, AYATSE, so like makeup artists and PAs and all these other people, they were going to do a strike, and then the strike got canceled because of this horrible deal that AYATSE cut with whoever they were, PGA, I think. It was a horrible deal. It was a humiliating deal, and I think the WGA learned that because of that horrible deal and because of a history of really bad deals being accepted, they're going to have to strike for a long time to really scare the industry into actually behaving even a little bit better. So I support them. It sucks that it had to come to this, but there's no such thing as a self-correcting system. That's not how this works. If the government doesn't intervene, the people have to intervene. That's how it works, because companies motivated by money will only react to one thing, money, whereas people are motivated by many things, as simple as food. If company misses a meal, the company is not affected by that because meals do not matter for a company. If a person misses a meal, guess what that one thing they're going to be thinking about until they get their next meal is? Just any guess in the world. That's the issue we're dealing with. So yeah, I just, I'm not the first person to talk about the problem with these smaller rooms and these hierarchies. And it's a really small, like, problem, but it's a consequence of what's happened with streaming and with all these different shows now. So, which is to say, I think it might have been easier for a writer to break into the industry 10, 15 years ago than it is now, because I've had close calls, but I've not gotten into a room. However, I have peers that have worked in rooms and some that have had quite a bit of success, and I've had some that it seems like nothing could have stopped them. They were just having meteoric success, and then nothing came of it. And it's happened over and over again. And it's happened enough times at different points that clearly something is wrong with the system for young writers, because I've never heard this story prior to 2014. I just haven't. So, and I've been paying attention since 2006 when I graduated college for the first time. So that's what it is. Yeah, it's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. And I hope the writers get what they ask for and more. I hope they don't kowtow to who they're striking against, because a show without a director might still be a show. A show without producers might still be a show. A show without a cinematographer, that would be a tough ask. A show without writers, there's only one kind of thing that exists without writers, and that's reality/documentary. And that's what happened in 2008. The reality shows that we're still mired in today are because of the 2008 writer's strike, because producers still had momentum and money and an unwillingness to interact with writers because the writers were striking, and they were basically saying, screw you, we'll make TV despite you. And that's how all of these sort of high concept, very interesting / manipulative reality shows have come out that you know, I don't know, I'm going into a weird place. Anyway, was this informative? Was this something you've heard before? Catch you next time.